All right, here we go. Hello, hello, welcome, and I'll go ahead and unmute the rest of us. How's everybody doing? Welcome, everyone. We have Ben. Ben, I have the terrible time pronouncing your last name.
Don't worry about it.
Okay.
The E and the S are together. S hog poor.
Aha.
It's
Okay.
so when I break it down, every time when I break it down that way, people are like, "Oh my gosh, that is just why did I not think of it?" And the
Awesome.
emphasis is on the first syllable.
Okay.
So
So thank you for that, because it has been a topic of discussion a few times. Like I'm not entirely sure how this works. So, well, thanks for popping on with us today for our very first, I believe, our very first workflow Wednesday.
workflow Wednesday.
Yeah, we like the alliteration, so we
I like it
figured.
too.
So I guess to start off, let's like you do, kind of tell us who you are, what you do, and all that good jazz.
So I have in the 20 oh gosh, when is it? When 97. So what is it? 23 years. 20 in the 23 years I've been here in Los Angeles. I've worn a number of different hats, but I currently do motion graphics and 3D animation and edit. And in a former life, I did cinematography and camera stuff, which I still love to do. But anyway, that's kind of the nutshell right there.
All right.
I could go on and on, but
How'd you end up on motion design?
you know, so for the first 7 years out here, I thought I wanted to be a studio executive, and so I toiled around in the studio system, and after about kind of 7 years, I decided, you know what, I think I need to go back to what I'm actually good at doing, which is production. So
Okay.
I all of my film school stuff was irrelevant. So I started running camera again and taking every camera job that I can get. Did a lot of free work, which, yeah, anyway, that's another story altogether in terms of my philosophy on doing free work.
Uh,
And I was kind of getting a little annoyed with how people were cutting together the footage that I was shooting. So I decided, you know what? I know how to edit, so I'll edit. So I started editing, and then people started hiring me to edit and shoot. And then
wow.
I thought, why don't I? This was probably what was this about 2005, 2006, 2007. Andrew Kramer was really the only one that was online doing After Effects tutorials. John Dickinson, who's now over at Boris Effects, he was also doing stuff as well too. And then, of course, Nick Campbell started, Grayscale Gorilla. So those were that, and also Harry Frank, who is over at Red Giant now. Those were kind of my main sources of, you know what, let me learn this, let me figure out how to do this. And I never went to school for design, and that's always kind of been my what do they call it? Uh, what is that? What is that psychological thing where you're
Imposter
not?
syndrome.
Yes, thank you. Imposter syndrome. Oh my gosh, that's always kind of been my big imposter syndrome thing. Is that I didn't
Yeah.
go to school for design, so I always feel a little uh, not embarrassed, but I don't feel as confident as I should, because everybody says, if you do it, you're this.
Oh,
If you write, then you're a writer. If
sure.
you act, then you're an actor.
Right.
So stop qualifying what you do. And anyway, so just started doing motion graphics, and people started liking it.
Hey.
And I decided to play around with Cinema 4D, and was watching Nick Campbell, Grayscale Gorilla, and learning with him, and I somehow I had edited a TV show for Showtime back in 2009. Yeah, 2009. And after that show, I got hired to do motion graphics and 3D animation for an infomercial company. And
Oh, neat.
yeah,
Like ShamWow style.
I was the first show that I worked on was a Beachbody show called 10 Minute Trainer. Yep,
That's awesome.
yep. Oh yeah, that was my
Nice.
that was my that wasn't technically my first infomercial that I worked on, but that was kind of that was kind of my entry into that world. And you know, when Showtime called to do season 2, unfortunately, they just had an executive shift. And typically here in the studio system, whenever a new executive comes in and takes over, any projects that are in development usually kind of get sidelined and pushed to the back burner because you know, new executives don't want to take responsibility for failures of the previous executive.
Sure.
But they will more than happy to take credit for successes. But getting those successes in the pipeline is a little slow. Anyway, so they unfortunately didn't have the same budget for season 2, so I didn't end up doing that. I was about ready to get married. So we were going to be paying for our own wedding, so I needed to make money, and the infomercial job paid very well.
Cool.
So I stayed there for a year and a half, and they, you know, I got paid to learn Cinema 4D, and that is probably one of the best ways to learn.
Oh yeah,
is when
for
somebody
sure.
pays you. But I mean, that was great. That was wonderful. And that was kind of how I got started. And actually, since I went back and I did one other project for Showtime a few years later, but with the exception of that editing job, I've pretty much just been doing motion graphics and 3D animation. Lately, over the last couple of years, I've started to kind of bring editing back into that, and then of course, you know, got the channel, creating content for the channel as well too. So that's a long way. That's a kind of a roundabout explanation of how I got into motion design. But I think probably one of the reasons why I enjoyed doing motion design and 3D animation is, you know, editing is a very kind of, I tend to think of editing as a very kind of left brain activity. You have things set out in a timeline, and yes, it's nonlinear, so you can move things around and whatever, but there tends to be a little bit more of kind of a logical order to things, especially if you're working in scripted, you know, whether it's a sitcom or a drama, you have a script that you're following.
Right.
So there are limitations to what you can do, but at the same time too, with those limitations comes a little bit of creative freedom in terms of how you're going to tell the story. You know, the best example is Pulp Fiction. You know, that there are a lot of stories going around Hollywood as to how that film came about to be the way that it is, and Sally Menke, who was the editor on that, I think was very instrumental and integral in taking a linear story, because obviously after you watch that entire movie, you realize that, hey, everything's weaved together.
Yeah.
But they did a really, really good job of intertwining the stories, or I should say reorganizing the stories into a different way, that it became something completely different. And that's a good way of a scripted project, and how an editor can come in and kind of shift things around to kind of make things look. Now, obviously, you know, people will say, well, Quentin Tarantino wrote it that way, but it doesn't feel like it was written that way.
Right.
Especially when you look at a lot of his other projects. A lot of his other projects are kind of very linear storytelling. That is one of the few that is just kind of not that way. But one of the things that I liked about motion graphics and 3D animation was, all of a sudden I kind of feel like I'm a director. I'm doing the camera moves. I'm directing people on the screen, helping them to see, okay, what do I need to see here? Okay, I want to see this. I want to see that. Okay, and then just moving things around, and so it was kind of the closest thing to being an actual film director, which is why I came out here in the first place. But so it kind of appealed to that kind of creative side of me, and gave me kind of a level of control that I probably wouldn't normally. You know, like I have a lot of reality TV editor friends, and you know, it's reality TV, again, it's one of those things where, yes, there's there's no script, so it's there's a lot of creativity that you have as an editor to be able to fashion a story together out of these little sound bites and tidbits and stuff like that. But that also too means wading through all of that footage and trying to find that one little nugget of story to tell. And those are some of the best, most talented and most patient editors out there.
Must be.
Yeah,
because like I've been binging some stuff lately myself, and there's a distinct difference between, like, say, Survivor, right, and the way that that's edited. Like, they must have gobs and gobs, because it's in a week at a time, or 3 days. Every 3 days is each weekly episode. And there still must be gobs and gobs of footage to go through. And how do you? It can't just be one person. There must be many people who are sifting through all those hours. But then, like, and then you go and watch something like, say, MasterChef, and you can totally tell that is cut and edited and put together in a way to try and, like, build this drama. And it comes off differently. It totally feels, it's a totally different feel depending on how it's edited together.
I also tell people, reality TV is not reality. It's still crafted. It's still, of course, it's still scripted. It's guided, because absolutely. You have typically, I have a friend of mine, good friend of mine. She did a lot of work on Top Chef. Top Chef, yes, Top Chef.
That's a good one.
Yeah, and so typically, each person has two cameras following them. So if the more people you have, and if you have typically two people following one person, I mean, that adds up. Then you've got a lot of camera crews, because it's not just cameras, it's audio. So you've got an audio person. There's also a producer. So I mean, there could easily be 5 people just around one person.
Wow.
Shooting them and whatnot. I saw a couple of years ago. I went to an event that was hosted by the Television Academy, where they had reality TV editors and producers talking about some things. And there was one editor who, I think it was Keeping Up with the Kardashians, I think that's around the time when Kanye kind of entered into Kim's life. I don't watch the show. I'm talking about it like I watch the show. But the clip that they showed was really fascinating, because they basically showed the raw camera. I think it was 2 cameras, and then they showed the final edited clip. And what was amazing was that was an instance in where they took something that happened, or I should say, they retold a story non-linearly. So they took the footage and they chopped it up to where kind of the beginning happened at the end, and and vice versa. So there are ways to kind of really make editing a creative task, and I know a lot of my editor friends would actually disagree with me in terms of describing it as kind of a very kind of left brain thing, because when you're telling a story, it's interesting how the brain works, because the left and the right actually do work together. You have the logic side, I'm talking to computer guys. So, computer guys who make creative machines. I got sidetracked. What were we talking about? We're talking about editing. Editing is a really, really fun task. But I've had this conversation with a number of editing friends too. They're like, why aren't you editing reality? Well, first of all, nobody's going to hire me to edit reality because I don't have reality show experience. That being said, it takes a very patient person to wade through all of that footage and find that one nugget.
The good stuff.
Yeah, the good stuff. And I don't know. That to me, I find it so much more interesting trying to solve a logo animation problem. It's like, because even with logo animations, and we've talked about we've talked about this as well too with with creating a logo animation for the podcast. I look at that as a little, kind of an opportunity to tell a little 5-second story.
Sure.
And sometimes I overthink it.
Yeah.
because I don't want to miss the opportunity of kind of getting the point across and being utilitarian and whatnot. But sometimes done is better than perfect. So
yeah, absolutely. That's something. Yeah, that's important.
Oh yeah. So now, but anyway, so that's. I don't know. I don't know.
That's that.
I don't even remember what the original question was.
No, it's okay. It's okay. This is all still kind of a new format, and we're shaking things out. But it's interesting to hear your perspective on this stuff and kind of get an idea of just kind of how a brain in this sort of industry works and kind of where your thought process is in a big way, which is actually kind of let's like we can take kind of a bigger picture view of this. And since you are kind of you said 23 years or something.
Yeah.
That's so I feel like you kind of have a good idea of kind of that broader picture. And so like not to I feel like this is a question that gets asked all the time. We were kind of talking about before the stream, but like how has this new work from home stuff, all of this remote work, all of this thing affected I suppose the industry at large? I know you had mentioned earlier that like production isn't happening, so like what does that mean? Like, has there been stuff that has been recorded previously, like that they can slowly release? Is there going to change more to less live, like in-person content? Like, how does that going to work in the next year?
Yeah, well, I'm curious to see how it's going to play out for the rest of this year. Sure. I know at least here in California, things. I think we're in phase 2 of a 4-phase reopening plan.
Something like that, yeah.
And I think shops. Well, what was it? I think shops are opening, but you still have to do curbside pickup. You can't actually go to a mall or anything. Yeah, there's limited capacity. I know anyway, so that's all that part of it. The harder part is obviously movie theaters. People can't go to movie theaters anymore. Right. So you had said it as well too. I think drive-throughs are going to be at least the immediate solution. But I mean, how many drive-through theaters are there now in this country? There aren't.
I think there's one in this state. I think there's one. In Washington, right now.
There may be a few here in Los Angeles. That I don't know. But so you have limited capacity in that regard. So you're not going to see. I mean, usually, like when I think Top Gun 2 is supposed to open this year. I mean, if they were to do a drive-through, release of that, they're very much not going to see the same numbers.
No way.
And in Hollywood, opening weekend is number one important thing for all other revenue streams after that.
Sure.
The performance of how it does in movie theaters determines the rollout of how it's going to happen for all of the other, video on demand, home video, streaming, all of that stuff. And so, Hollywood still puts all of its eggs in the opening weekend.
Sure.
But what we saw with Onward was released, I think, the weekend before the lockdowns happened here in Los Angeles.
Maybe around there, yeah. I remember seeing talk about it on Disney Plus.
Yeah, and then Disney Plus, they acted quickly, and they plopped it on Disney Plus, and they saw they saw a good increase in numbers in that regard, and so I think Disney Plus, and that's the other part of it too. So Warner Brothers, their streaming service is, I think, HBO Max, I think is what it's going to be called.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure, I'm almost 100% positive that hasn't gone live yet.
Oof. And
because I know that they were gearing up and they were hiring people.
Sure.
They were hiring people on the level that Netflix, was kind of, has people. Netflix has a number of motion graphics artists on staff to help create, the content. So when you when you're scanning through Netflix, you can see a preview and this and that or whatever. But
Right.
so HBO Max was gearing up for that. Well, all of that stuff is pretty much on hold. They're not so I had an interview at Warner Brothers. So things shut down here in Los Angeles, I think Friday the 13th. In March, I had the interview on Thursday the 12th. I got an email the next day, we're on hold, So there's that part of it. So all the live shows essentially shut down that week. So
Right.
They weren't doing any live shows. Ellen shut down, and all that stuff shut down. Fallon, all those guys, they're all doing stuff from home. Fallon's actually been doing some interesting stuff from home. I will give him that.
It seems pretty cool how some of the people who have had live audiences would have seemed to be transitioned pretty well to producing content in their own homes and things like that. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, I think you can also, somebody who's able to actually, I think one of the things that I appreciated about Fallon, and maybe it's because I have kids, but I mean, he very much incorporated his kids into the actual show.
Yep.
And I thought that was, very, very well done and very creative in that regard. But as far as dramas and sitcoms, well, sitcoms obviously aren't happening because,
Sure.
You can't have a live studio. Actually, I think when I'm gotta double check on this because I know sitcoms can still shoot, but they can't have a live studio audience. But
Okay.
then again, also too, I don't know how. I saw an article I think in the Hollywood Reporter yesterday about are people going to be doing love scenes now in TV shows? And I'm like, wow. Is this really is this really affecting everything?
Interesting question, but I think that's the thought there is a little extreme.
Yeah. I think it's going to be interesting to see for sure.
Yeah. I'm really curious to see your thoughts on, so like everything coming out right now obviously has already been shot and edited and all
Yes.
that, and
Yeah.
eventually that well is going to dry up.
Yes.
Like all of that content that they already have that they can then push out, like that well is going to dry up. So do you see any like format, and they're not going to not produce content, like
right? Yeah,
that's what they're going to do,
Yeah.
So how do you see like them adapting, and how do you see them do you see the format changing of the content that they're putting out?
That's a good question.
I ask this because like I'm kind of like what comes to my mind is like what Disney is doing right now. They're putting out all this like short form content, like they're starting this whole series that's like 30-second clips of just like Olaf running around,
Right. I think are you because I know I subscribe to the Disney YouTube channel, and I've been seeing those little Olaf animations. Yeah, those are cool.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, like, are we going to start seeing potentially more of that? More short-form content that they can kind of throw together now and then push out that it's consumable during kind of this time,
That's a good question because I know in terms of security, Disney is probably one of the most strict studios out there because they've got Marvel, they've got Star Wars, they've got Pixar, and just about every other piece of kids content out there. But and I know many years ago I worked for a company that did a lot of Disney Channel promos, and that was, when was that? That was about 2015, and around that time Disney was making their vendors sign these really ridiculous overreaching kind of security contracts that basically, again, your work machine is disconnected from the internet. So you need to have two machines at your workstation. You need to have your work machine, and then you need to have an internet machine, and they can't talk to each other.
Wow.
So your email, you get your email on one computer, and NBC is the same way. You've got two machines. You've got a work machine, and you've got your email machine. The work machine is not connected to the internet, but it is connected to a network. So if you can download something on the internet machine, put it on a thumb drive and transfer it, or you can put it on the digital asset management system.
Wow.
Anyway, so there's that aspect. So I'm curious to know, actually, because Disney, all of these studios, they have third-party vendors to do all of this stuff. So I don't know how, because again, how are they going to get access to those things? At least with those little Olaf animations, I think those are the animators themselves who are creating that content at home and posting it.
Sure. It is.
Because and those are really short little animations. I don't think I saw one that was longer than 30 seconds. But even then, that we're not talking about something that requires a massive amount of, rendering compute power. And who knows? I mean, maybe it does. And so that's a really, really good question, because my question goes back to security. How do you keep those? How do you keep those assets secure? How do you keep those assets from getting out to somebody else or whatever it is? And I think I'm hoping that's what they've been spending this time trying to figure out, because you're right, content still needs to get created, because I've a friend who edits on Deadliest Catch, and they'd shot all that stuff prior to the lockdown, so editing was still going on. As archaic as it was, I think my friend had to team viewer into his work machine at the production company, but that's one show. I know there are other shows that are doing that as well too. So yeah, I'm kind of like you. It's like, what happens when that stuff dries up? I mean, they've got to make more of that. I wish I had a better answer for you, because I go back to the security thing, and if Disney, I know Netflix, Netflix is probably the model in a lot of how these streamers are working. I know Netflix has a lot of staff people and people on staff. I'm not sure how their digital asset management systems work. But because they were, the first to this kind of whole streaming race, I have to assume that they have kind of the best network set up for that to happen, for people to be able to work from home. Sure. Apple is probably another one that's probably perfectly situated for something like this as well too, because they're a tech company, so I'm sure they have something like that figured out. So streaming services, again, like HBO Max, I mean, I'm not sure when they were scheduled to launch that, but a lot of that has been put on hold because nobody's been hired for stuff like that. CBS is another streaming service that also has. I'm curious. I know that CBS has been actively producing original content like Netflix and Amazon Prime, but so yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see. I do think that once things open up, there's going to be a mad dash to finish a bunch of stuff, because they're going to want to get, they're going to want to get content out there. So whether it's streamed or in a theater or, Yeah.
Do you so while you were mentioning about production and things like that, like especially when it comes to like live human content, do you know there's a gentleman that I follow on Twitter and have interacted with a little bit. His name is Matt Workman. He goes by Cine Database. So he's been working on a thing of like a virtual production environment where it's like it's basically like a big green room or a green screen stage, and then and it's all virtual, like it's in Unity or Unreal, the actual, and it seems like an interesting crossover between kind of what they've been doing with The Mandalorian with that kind of gigantic LED screen, but then also there's like a piece of kind of remote work to it. I could see, I personally could see how that might be helpful in a situation like this, where you could have just one camera guy, one actor, and then you could have like a greened out stand-in for maybe another actor who is at their garage or at their home or something like that. And do you see do you see maybe that sort of technology or implementation could be really kind of steam powered, or not steamrolled, but like kind of boosted? Like
Oh,
I
totally.
could see a lot more investment into that sort of
Oh
a
yeah,
solution.
absolutely,
And
absolutely.
I wonder if maybe some of the big boys might be working on something like that, or might kind of snatch
Well,
up a similar solution.
I am curious. I know I've had some friends say that they still had to do a lot of post work on the Mandalorian.
Sure.
So it's not a perfect. And it's funny too because I remember being at NAB in 2018, I think it was, and I remember walking through the floor and seeing all of these massive virtual sets and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, that's great. That's who's going to pay for this? And I'm like, what? I mean, sometimes I'm just like, kind of like, okay, I need to be a little bit more
Sure.
mindful of the future. But I mean, because now we're seeing that with Mandalorian, I mean, that's exactly what what that was. But there's still, again, even with stuff like that, there's still going to be post work that needs to happen. So they're still going to have to hire visual effects artists and color graders and editors and stuff like that. So, I mean, it's going to be interesting. We are in a time where it is absolutely possible to work from home, and you have people like the Corridor crew. All they need is an internet connection and just to upload content to YouTube, and they're done. So same thing. You got people like Action Movie Dad who is producing content with his kids and being the wonderful Twitter troll that he is.
That's some of that's funny.
He's genius. I keep telling him, like, dude, you need to create a Twitter troll course. You're so genius at it. But so yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely going to be more virtual production going on, and the bigger question is, are we going to have the pipeline to be able to transmit that content,
Yeah, that actually kind of, when you had mentioned about how there still needs to be a lot of post production, like on The Mandalorian and things, and so yeah, that kind of brings up that question, is like how I feel like the tools right now aren't quite built for the situation we're in, and like, has that affected you in your work and or maybe the people around you at all? Like, how do you get the job that you would normally work on locally to where you are now, and how do you collaborate with people
Wow.
when you can't share an office with them?
Yeah, it's when I'm trying to remember where I heard this, but ever since I heard it, I've loved it, and I've always kind of corrected people when they say it's all about who you know, and I don't think it's as much about who you know as much as it is about who knows you, because and Winbush, my friend Winbush, who's on the chat, said likes to say that your network is your net worth, and so it's in terms of going about finding those jobs, the reality is, so many production jobs happen because of people working together, people knowing, hey,
Right.
I know that guy. He can be my grip, or he can be the gaffer or whatever. One of my old roommates was a gaffer, and he constantly was, he was able to, he worked whenever he wanted to, of course, as most freelancers do. But he almost all of his jobs came from friends, came from colleagues that he worked with. So I have to assume that it's probably going to be a very similar process in that regard. I know I was kind of on staff for about 3 years, or in kind of a long-term freelance job for 3 years, and so I stopped networking, and I stopped going to meetups and stuff like that, and it hurt me. It hurt me when I when that company decided to go in a different direction, and I had to get back into the freelance world. And I didn't know anybody. I didn't even know I knew some of the broadcast design companies that were out there, but so all of that to say that I think that people that get those jobs are going to get those jobs because of their network, because of the people that they know, because of those things, and so I think that's still going to be the same way, because people like working with people they know, and if there's it's one of the reasons why somebody like Steven Spielberg works with the same exact people on almost every film. John Williams scores all of his movies. Janusz Kaminski is his cinematographer since Schindler's List. So Michael Kahn is his editor, because there's an unwritten kind of workflow that goes on that Michael Kahn doesn't need to necessarily know what's in Spielberg's mind. He's going to cut it together the way that he's there's an unwritten kind of way of how they work and how they operate, and and there's a freedom in that. So
How do you think though that they can how will they be able to work together when they can't really be together?
So
and I suppose, and again, like I feel like that kind of applies to, like, sure, like, oh, I know my buddy Jeff, he can totally do this editing thing, but like now how do I work with him when I can't go visit him, when we can't be on set together or that kind of a thing, like, and how do you reconcile that? I feel like again, like I think this comes down to the workflow, right? When normally you would do these things this way, and now there's like a big roadblock right in the middle.
Yeah, the biggest.
How do you think people overcome that?
I almost feel like the first. Sorry. No, I almost feel like the first question would just be like, are they even trying to do that?
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
Like, is it basically like full stop? Let's just kind of wait and see and wait until this blows over, or are they trying to adapt right now?
And I happen to lean towards what you're saying, Eric. Is that I think that there is going to be a certain amount of weight involved in let's see what happens, because any big corporation, but especially studios, they can't move on a dime. Right. Everybody, and and Eric, this in having to deal with a lot of vendors that you have to deal with. I mean, you have so many people that have to give their stamp of approval on any given decision, and right. So they're inside of the studio system. It's even that much more complicated, because then and it's funny too, because I know this from working in a bunch of different studios and networks, and you would sit there and think that there would be a lot more communication going on between departments, but the reality is a lot of the way that these studios are set up is that every department is almost its own business entity, and so sure. I know when I was at Sony, we were developing. This was 2001 to 2004 or 5. So this was pre-Netflix. This was YouTube to a certain extent. We were creating, some of the first streamed, TV shows, day and date episode TV shows. And but we had to license those shows from Sony Pictures Television. We were all the same studio. We were all the same entity. But we still had to get, and some of that is legal reasons, because they have production companies that they work with, and so they don't want to give a sweetheart deal to an internal company when they could get more money from Warner Brothers. Like Warner Brothers Television is probably one of the biggest TV producers in the business. Warner, they did Friends, they do Big Bang Theory and all that stuff. Well, when Warner Brothers is when Big Bang Theory is going into syndication, they need to make sure they have an obligation to Chuck Lorre, who is the creator of that show. They have an obligation to Chuck Lorre to make sure that they get top dollar for those syndication rights. Sure. And so if that show ends up on TBS had better be paying fair market value for that show. And right. So, so you have a lot of that stuff going on, and I say all of that to say that you have so many people that are trying to give their stamp of approval on how things work and how things operate. You have the IT security systems, you have all of those things that need to happen, and so unfortunately, again, like I said, I really hope they've been spending these last 2 months in trying to figure out the best way to move forward in that regard, because it's we can't there needs to be a solution, and so I know at least I know like
I wonder if we'll see. Well, no, I wonder if we'll see maybe some a little bit more of independence. Like you said, like within a large company, there's all these like almost separate companies under this big umbrella.
Yeah.
I wonder if they might like kind of let go of some of that micromanagement and just say, well, you know what,
I don't think they'll
you
ever let
guys
go of that.
you guys can go ahead. Well, in a way where like maybe some of the higher level like decision making can just kind of be, you know what, you guys have been doing such a good job already, we're just going to kind of let you guys do your thing, and see what happens, because I feel like if you're so big you can't pivot, you can't adjust and adapt, you're going to die. I mean, look at what happened to the record labels with Napster and things like that. Like they tried to hold on to that CD album like paradigm for so long until they were losing so much money they had to change. And I feel like we might be at the very, very beginning of that kind of a massive shift.
It's funny you bring up the music industry. Side note, I know when Apple was developing iTunes, I mean, it's it's in Walter Isaacson's book on the Steve Jobs biography. I mean, he one of the biggest allies that Steve Jobs had was it Doug Morris at Universal? I think it was Doug Morris. Anyway, Universal was one of the first groups to sign on to iTunes, and they had an opportunity to get Sony on board right away, and Sony decided not to do it. And one of the reasons that Sony decided not to do it is because they were also, because I was at Sony at the time, they were developing a music store for Sony Music, but adapt or die, Sony was trying to make it proprietary. Sony was trying to do a lot of things that made it more difficult, to where when iTunes launched, that was the end of it. And but I love what you said, adapt or die. So it's going to be interesting to.
And it's interesting to hear that Universal was I imagine it's Universal Music Group or Media Group or something.
Universal Music Group.
It's interesting to hear that they were one of the first to jump onto iTunes, because just recently all of this hubbub with AMC and how Universal started putting their content out and streaming their stuff out to the masses. That's kind of a cool thing to know that they have a history of kind of staying up with a current trend.
And it's funny. It's funny that little rift is going on, because I'm kind of like, you know what, AMC, you really can't afford to to be going toe to toe with Universal. I mean,
but it does show though that they do have a history of kind of seeing what's coming and adapting to, and so that's cool to, and they're so huge that if they kind of start doing this more often, like I'm not sure exactly what content it is that they released like so quickly, but if they continue to do so, I could see where more bigger studios would follow along.
Well, I know that Universal has the new Fast and Furious movie coming up soon. So because that was a conversation I was having with some friends. It's like, let's say movie theaters open up on Monday next week. Let's say everybody can go to the movies. Is AMC really not going to take Fast and the Furious? Come on.
Right.
So, I mean, I love movie exhibitors. I mean, going to movies, that was a big part of my childhood. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I wanted to get into this business. I mean, there was something magical about sitting there in that seat and just watching a story unfold, and just the whole escapism aspect of it was absolutely what drew me in and made me want to do this for a living, and to get into this and to get into this business. And so, but I will say also too, movie watching has evolved for me. I mean, ever since the TV show 24, I can't. That was the first.
That was great.
That was the first show I ever binge watched, and because I remember I think it was the summer after the first season that show came out. Fox made a really, really smart decision to put it out on DVD. Netflix was doing DVD at the time, so I could get 24 on Netflix, but I couldn't go to Blockbuster and get it because they were all out at Blockbuster.
Yep.
And so when that first season of 24, because I knew 24 being the format that it was, I couldn't just jump in on episode 5. I would already have missed 4 hours of essentially kind of what happened in the real world. So I knew that was one of those shows that I knew I needed to watch episode. I couldn't just jump in on it like Law and Order. Law and Order, you can they just each episode is a one-off.
Yeah, it's different between those encapsulated stories versus the big arc throughout the whole thing.
But ever since now, it's like I'm catching up on the current season of Better Call Saul. I mean, so binge watching has definitely become a way in which people just watch TV. I know Disney was trying to discourage that with Mandalorian by dropping an episode every week, and I was kind of like, I mean, I guess to a certain extent that could kind of work still, but people like me, I'm just gonna wait until it's all out, and then I'll just all watch it back to back. But that being said, too, with a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old, it's next to near impossible to have any kind of focused energy to watch. I have friends of mine that laugh at me, when it's like, why is it taking you 3 different sittings to watch a 2-hour movie? And I'm like, I'm sorry. It's just, I think Knives Out was the last movie that I sat there the entire time and watched that whole thing. I was like, holy moly, that's a great movie. I mean, that was, so I think viewing has definitely changed. It's all of that to say, to get back to, I think, what the original question was in terms of how production is going to evolve. And I think that it is going to be a lot more virtual, if you will. But you still, you still need to have people in proximity to each other. You still need to have lighting technicians. You still need to have somebody to operate the big LED screen. You need a camera operator. You still need people around you. So I'm curious to know how things are going to progress if we still have to do social distancing, which is interesting because you have countries like Sweden and Taiwan who never did any social distancing at all. And they didn't shut down. They didn't do any of that kind of stuff. And relatively speaking, the numbers, Taiwan's numbers are really super low. But they didn't shut down the subways. They treated their, because I think I saw some doctor talking about surgical masks and how we, as a society here in this country, we just don't do surgical masks because we're not that kind of a society. Right. So we don't have the same kind of conceptual idea of how to be sanitary with those things. And so, of course, we're touching our faces and everything like that. I mean, we're all not surgeons.
Below your nose.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, my gosh. Oh, anyway. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. So ultimately it's going to come, what's the biggest thing that's going to come into play is whether or not people can get into the same room again. Right. And I know churches are, especially a lot of the big mega churches are doing online church. Yep. There are still people on that stage. Yeah, they're 6 feet apart and various different things, but so there are ways of doing it safely. And, so it's going to be, again, a lot of these studios have to think about liability issues. I mean, every studio has a massive amount of lawyers on staff that are doing nothing but thinking about how people are going to sue them. Right. And, so, I remember when I was at NBC, in last year, we were doing a show for NBC Sports. I mean, it was, before and this was a YouTube show, but before anything could go up on YouTube, the lawyers had to approve it, and so it's, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting for sure. So, but I don't think, I think at some point, because most of the people, most of the what they call below the line people, the camera operators, the gaffers, the grips, most of those people, you know, they're salt of the earth kind of people.
Sure.
And they're, you know, in some respects, they're similar to kind of construction workers and just people who are very hands-on and you know, deal with day-to-day kinds of things. They go to work when they're sick. You know, if they've got the flu, sometimes, well, unless it's really bad, they don't go. But, you know, so I think once things start opening up, I honestly, I'm curious. I don't think people are going to care too much about having to worry about things. So that's ultimately, I think, what it's going to come down to.
Huh. That's interesting.
So, but I there's a part of me that really truly feels like that once things, whether it's, well, actually, I think it's a two-pronged thing. You know, I think there's things at the federal level, but a bigger issue is things at the state level. Once the state says, hey, it's okay to get back to, you know, it's okay to be in the same room together, you know, once that happens, I think things are going to come back in full force.
Yeah.
But
so it might not be, I suppose long term there might not be as much of a negative effect as some might think.
Well, I do know one of the things that I think that I was seeing on Twitter yesterday is, at least in post-production, you know, the sector of post-production that seems to still be doing a lot of work lately are animators, whether they're 2D or 3D. And I think that has a lot to do with just because, you know, there's a company that I've been in communication with this whole entire time in terms of projects, and I'll constantly get emails. Hey, are you available? Are you available? Are you available? Yeah, I'm available. Yeah, I'm available. And invariably, what always happens is they creatively decided to go a different route.
Right.
And so the manpower that they would have needed for the particular project essentially kind of either got slimmed or the other part of it is budgets.
Sure.
You know, that's the big thing too, is that nobody's spending any money because nobody knows, you know.
Yeah.
So so you have a lot of people, you have a lot of vendors who are doing a lot of social media stuff because it's cheap. They can you know, they can get away with doing that, but you know, bigger projects, you know, bigger jobs, they're not happening right now because people, you know, don't know, is my advertising budget going to be taken away from me? I mean, is Nike going to decide to not spend $100 million on, you know, on an ad campaign because they can't shoot an ad campaign? So how are they going to do it? You know, I mean,
we're going to see like 2 years worth of cartoons for after all this.
I mean,
this is kind of
what I was getting to earlier when I was kind of talking about, like, is the format going to change? Like, that's a big question I have. It's like, if we can't get people together to actually shoot something, are we going to start seeing like more animated stuff popping up?
Bunch of CGI stuff.
I mean, I think the quick answer is yes. I think you will. You know, because you know, I don't know how to say this without sounding like I'm selling your machines, but yeah, I mean, you guys make amazing systems that are I mean. I honestly, I haven't run Unreal Engine on this machine yet, but I have friends who, you know, they have, you know, they have two, you know, graphics cards. Or sorry, my wife was blending upstairs. But you know, even just with two graphics cards, they're able to just chunk out a 4K animation in Unreal in such a short period of time that in Octane the same thing might take, you know, a day to render. So, you know, so yeah, I mean, if people have, because that's going to become the bigger issue as well too, is are individuals like me going to have, first of all, hey, I need somebody to pay me to do a job. And once you pay me, then I'll look to see, you know, once I get that money, I'll look to see what money I can use to invest in getting a better machine that will allow me to do better work. So, you know, I don't know. There might be, I don't know if, you know, if places like, you know, studios and networks are saying, hey, you know, we'll send you a work machine. to be able to do this work from home, because that's going to be the bigger bottleneck issue is, will people have the hardware at home to be able to do those things? A lot of your editors and animators typically already have those things at home at their disposal to do side freelance jobs in addition to studio work. But again, I mean, I'm not gonna take on a job that I'm not going to be able to render, or that I'm not going to be able to finish. So I know a lot of people are living day to day, and so they're in a lot of credit card debt, and so they might not have the leeway or the capacity to invest in getting a new machine to be able to take that job that's only going to last for a couple of weeks.
Right.
So, I think that's going to be the biggest issue in terms of a virtual production is, are people going to be able to have the hardware to be able to complete those jobs and get them done? Because budgets have reduced, so people aren't paying as much, if they're paying at all. And so, everything costs something. So, I think that's probably a long roundabout answer to your question, Eric.
Yeah, I was hoping that there might be a silver lining there, that it means that like more work is coming your guys' way,
Well,
specifically on like the motion design and 3D animation.
I do think that is going to happen. One of the things, again, for people like me, we have systems at home to do that. So it's not really an issue in that regard. But I do worry about the people who don't have systems at home, and I hate saying, I hate speaking in evolutionary terms, but I mean, in that regard, in some ways, the fittest survive. But so I hope that that's not the case, but it probably might be. I think you're right. I think I think once there's a little bit more certainty in the economy, and companies know how to spend their advertising dollars, or I should say, know that they're going to have those advertising dollars. I just saw a headline today: Disney's profits went down 91%.
Yeah, I saw 1.4 billion in recent,
So and what again, not trying to be Debbie Downer or anything like that, but that's going to translate into people getting laid off.
Sure. That's
going to translate into Disney not spending money on certain things, or picking and choosing which projects they're going to spend money on. So, it's there's unfortunately a lot of uncertainty going on right now, and I'm hoping we're gonna have answers in the next week or so. I mean, I seriously, I think that's gonna be important for sure. So
I'm very curious if there's anything that you're doing, any advice that you might have for people. That
actually, I think that'll make for a good wrap up. Actually, it's just what would you say to say other folk in your industry, or even maybe somebody like newer into it, like what can they be doing to maybe prepare for the next week, next month, the rest of the year?
I would say, and I'm speaking to myself in this regard as well too, I would say probably some of the biggest things to do are to make sure all of your work is up to date, whether it's on your portfolio website or your reels and whatnot. I have some, again, like I said, I'm speaking to myself. I have some stuff of work that I did at the beginning of this year. I need to get that stuff up on my site and into my reels and stuff like that. So there's that work that needs to happen. You do have a lot of people who are learning new skills right now. I know a lot of people are diving into Houdini right now because they have the time to do it. I would say creativity is a muscle, so it needs to be exercised like any other muscle, like your brain or anything like that. It needs to be exercised, and so, I know one of the hardest thing for me, especially for people with, I think, small children, is finding the time to be able to do those tasks and doing those things. And I know the biggest challenge for a lot of people too, especially with kids, is school is virtual now, and so they're having to be virtual teachers and stuff like that, and so focus is split. So I think the way forward, I think the thing to do is to try and find ways to exercise your creative muscle and to create, kind of keep yourself creatively relevant. Yeah, I saw somebody just comment that says, Wimbush just commented saying people should learn a new program. I mean, take this time to make yourself relevant, because I think that's going to be kind of the important thing. And I think kind of what you were touching on earlier, Eric, too, with the future. I mean, we don't know exactly what's going to happen, but I do think that we have indication of what's going to happen in the future in terms of virtual production and those kind of workflows. So getting up to speed on those things, I think, are all staying up to date on all those things are kind of the way forward.
Yeah, I wonder if like going back to something you had said earlier about how it tends to be. I mean, it's no different than any industry really. That it tends to be who you know.
Yeah.
It, even less so about what you know, and it's more about who you know. So I wonder because it's also a really tough time. I mean, you talk about people get living day to day at this point.
Yeah.
Like paying for software right now or paying for training on that software, like that's difficult too. So
yes, it
is. I wonder if a big thing that people could be doing right now is actually just like virtual networking, like getting yourself out there. And because like if you're building those connections now, when the money's there to be spent.
Right. I'm part of. There's a networking group that I'm a part of here. Well, there's two that I'm a part of here, and they're both kind of offshoots of digital. One, they're Digital Media Arts of Orange County, and we had a virtual meet last night, and I sadly was only able to be on it for a short period of time because it was bedtime for kids, But yeah, I think that's, and I also that's kind of almost one of the reasons why I decided to live stream myself, is in the hopes that I could, a lot of creative people are night owls, not everybody. Some people work, best in, bright and early in the morning, but, there are a lot of night owls. And also too, I know, there are people in Europe and, in other parts of the world that are up. It's daytime there when it's nighttime here. So that was kind of in the back of my head. One of the reasons why I kind of wanted to do some, kind of live streaming is hopefully have, some kind of a place for people to come and talk. I think I called it movies, music, and MoGraph after dark, because I wanted to be able to have people, just talk about stuff. And it's a little bit difficult to interact in a live stream situation unless you're chatting. And so sometimes it's difficult to keep an eye on what's going on in the chat and being in the moment of what you're trying to do. I think things like this are really, really wonderful, having these little Zoom meetings so you can actually have some interaction and have a conversation going. So I think you hit the nail on the head right there, Eric. I think virtual meetups and virtual networking is definitely a good way to go right now. Obviously, out of necessity, but even maybe moving forward. And so it's I think that's important. I feel like I'm starting to ramble now. So sorry.
Oh, you're good.
Yeah.
But did I answer your question?
Yeah, no, I think it was. I think so. Yeah, I think it was really good. Covered kind of both angles there. What can we all? I feel, and honestly, not just for MoGraph people, but I feel like that's good advice all around. Honestly,
across every industry.
Learn new stuff. Take time enough to learn something new. And meet new people and really try and build relationships. I think that's good advice all around.
There was something you said that actually I meant to answer and I'd forgotten about it. But you were talking about learning new software and learning new things. One of the things that I appreciate Joey Cornerman over at School of Motion doing is offering up scholarships to people to learn new things and to take that opportunity, because you have other people that are, hey, 10% off of my $300 course. Well, 10% off of a $300 course is that's for some people that's a car payment. For some people, that's keeping the lights on or keeping the internet working or whatever it is. So, I would also, there's a lot of really, really great resources on YouTube. I keep talking about my friend Wimbush. He's killing it in Unreal right now on his YouTube tutorials, and he just did a really great presentation on C4D Live a couple weeks ago during NAB. But there was also a lot of great other Cinema 4D artists out there for C4D Live. We got a lot of stuff there. Red Giant has a lot of Red Giant, Boris Effects both have a lot of really, really great tutorials. Boris Effects just launched Paint for After Effects, which is going to be a game changer in my mind in terms of doing painting effects inside of After Effects, because you can't do that with built-in tools. So so there are a lot of really, really great free resources on YouTube. Sure. And so I would encourage people to go find that stuff. I think John Dickinson put a lot of his training up on YouTube for After Effects basics and stuff like that. So I am going to try and start doing more editing tutorials. And it's funny because and I say this to a lot of people, it's like you would think that being stuck at home would be a perfect opportunity to create new content. And no, if my kids were at school, that would be different. But
right.
So there are a lot of really great free resources for sure. And I would definitely exhaust those first before paying for sure. Any material. And and I'm not saying don't pay for material. There's there are Houdini courses. There are a lot of really, really specialized courses that it's worth every penny to pay for something like that if that's something that you want to do. Sure. But I wouldn't fork out a huge amount of money for a training series unless you know for a fact that there's going to be a return on investment, for sure.
Totally.
Yeah. Right on.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just get by right now.
Yeah.
Yes.
A lot of it is kind of day to day.
I agree.
Stay safe and just get through it.
Yes. Yeah. No, I agree with you.
There's a lot of people talking about learn all these new skills and stuff like that. I mean, we were even talking about it now, but at the end of the day, like, just get through. Like it's it's a rough time. It's a rough time for a lot of people. So as long as you make it through it.
And I don't mean to mean to sound like I'm harping on people who are selling training courses, because they need to eat too. I mean they need sales.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you can afford it, absolutely.
Yes. Yeah.
I think that's a big part of it. Is the first step is self-awareness. Like, okay, like I would never judge anybody. I'm not taking a whole lot of opportunity to learn new stuff. I am trying to like just do the best that I can at the things that I need to do, and so I would never like judge anybody who came out of this basically the same.
Right.
Like it can be a lot. It can be just as much as you can handle just to stay normal.
Yes. Yes.
And that's totally okay. I feel like that's a big message to get out there. Is like, I feel like some people kind of put pressure on or put it out there to push other people. Oh, if you don't come out of this with a new skill, then you suck. And it's like, man, if I come out of this at all as without a mental illness, I'm gonna count that as a win. Like, if I don't break down and become like a complete horrible hermit, like, I'm gonna count that as a win. So, like, and
it's funny too. And I'm speaking to myself when I say this, is that you have to be okay with
first
not, as much as I hate saying it, not getting the things done that you want to get done. I mean, that's I have found new satisfaction, if you will, if you getting at least 4 hours of work done, let alone 8 or 10 or 12, which is typical of post-production and production for that matter. So I feel like if I can get 4 hours worth of work done in a day, then I'm happy. I'm fine. And I know one of the things that lasts and at least for me, it's almost virtually impossible for me to get anything done during the day work-wise. And I don't know. I'd like to think that most creative people are probably in my boat, in that there's an intense amount of focus that needs to go into the creative process. And while it is a muscle and you do exercise it daily and whatnot, it's not always a switch that you can just, kind of turn on and off. It takes Joey Cornerman in his, Freelance Manifesto. I love the way that he talked about it when he was talking about freelancing and working from home, is that, you need to have a distraction-free environment, because, and you need to even have that conversation with, your better half and your kids in that regard as well too, is that, because any distraction, it's not just, hey, daddy, where's this? Or, hey, honey, can you go change the, the stuff from the washer to the dryer? It's not just a simple 5-10 minute task that's involved. Nope. It's all of the stuff that you don't see behind that, of breaking the focus, of getting back into where you left off and getting back into the flow of things can sometimes, I think Joey talked about it, is that you have to think about a little interruption as not just a little 1 or 2 minute interruption. It's a 15-minute interruption.
It is.
And so if you have those happening multiple times throughout the day, that's time. That's time that's time that you're not being able to build. That's time that you're not being able to do any of those things. In this environment that we're in right now, all of that kind of goes out the door, because you have to, like you just said, Houston, getting through it is more important, especially considering that as much as I hate saying it, that most people aren't working right now. So it's not like, it's not like I have somebody, like Puget Systems breathing down my throat, getting them to wanting a animation. No, but there's my, we're all harder on ourselves than we are on other people sometimes, unless it's our family, and then we're really hard on them. And so I think one of the things for me is that if I don't feel like I'm getting the quality time to invest in something particular, I'm cranky. I am cranky. And my wife knows it, and my kids know it. And if my wife is watching this thing, she will 100% agree with you. And I don't know if she'll ever pop that up in the chat or not, but, so that's been the biggest challenge for me these last couple of months, is not just being patient with myself, but being patient with my family. Because, especially with young kids, they don't really know what's going on.
Right.
I mean, my kids do, because they're stuck in the house all day. So they look for every opportunity to go out and ride a bike or something like that, or play outside. But, when, distance learning started for, my son, him getting back into the flow of doing schoolwork again was a little difficult. I mean, there were a couple of weeks where it's like all he wanted to do was play. And, he takes piano lessons. And so, my wife being a piano teacher, she doesn't teach our son, but being a piano teacher, she knows the importance of piano in a lot of different ways mentally, but also habit building, because, practicing every day develops a habit of creating and doing those tasks and keeping things organized and focused and stuff like that. And so it all translates into other things. So as he gets older, he'll have those habits of study. He'll have the study habits of various different things kind of built up, and all those systems built up. And so same kind of thing goes for everything else. It's like, it's same thing with creativity. The more you do it, the better, the easier you will be able to access those functions and abilities to be able to do things. And so in this time that we're in right now, it's important to kind of take a step back and say, what's more important, me figuring out how this webcam is going to work or on a Zoom chat, or me making sure that my kid can read and write and
Right.
and finish the task that he needs to finish. And so it's I'm still learning every day.
I think it's the same thing with everyone.
Yeah.
Everyone's in the same boat. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I think that I think being okay with taking your time has to be kind of one of the first and foremost things that I think people need to focus on.
Yeah.
Is sometimes it's still a very hard thing for me. Like we were, my wife and I were talking about. There was something, I forget what it was. It was probably one of my YouTube videos. Actually, yeah, it was one of the YouTube videos that I did a few weeks ago. It took 5 days to get that thing done, and it should have only taken less than 2, not even 2. And it took 5 days. And my wife's like, "Why isn't it up?" And I'm like, "What do you mean, why isn't it up?" There's 3 reasons why it's not up. Not saying that to blame anyone, but it's like it just takes longer. A 2-hour task is going to take 8 hours, and if you only get 4 hours in a day, it's going to take 2 days. So time management is is kind of a big thing to keep on, but it's important to just kind of be like, what, I
totally agree.
It's not done. Sorry. But it, managing your own, kind of patience level and stuff like that is definitely, it's like if I wanted to be a mental health, physician or something like that, that's what I would have gone into. But at the same time too, we're all wearing a bunch of different hats right now. And
right.
Yeah, I think that will be one of the bigger positives that comes out of all this. Is that self-reflection, that level of self-awareness that we'll have coming out the other side of this, knowing what's important to us, what our priorities are, and all that.
Well, it's funny too, because it's day by day thing too, because there are days when I wake up, it's a day by day thing, but it's also too a sleep thing. Like, if not to get too personal in terms of, I have sleep apnea, so I have a CPAP machine, and if I happen to fall asleep at night because I'm so tired and I forget to put it on, when I wake up the next day, I am a zombie and I am cranky and I'm angry. And so getting a good night's sleep is just as important as anything else, because, I know that when I've had the right amount of sleep and when I've had the quality sleep, I am, I'm on fire. I have a lot of patience. But then there are days, again, too, being stuck inside also has a whole mental task in and of itself, because it's like, there are days that I wake up and like at 10 o'clock in the morning, I'm already, hearing my 3-year-old ask me the same question 5 bazillion times, until he gets the answer that he's looking for is, I'm like, wow, this is 10 o'clock and I'm already on edge,
Yeah.
So it's, I know people with kids understand it, but, not to disclude single people, they have their own, issues to deal with as well too. Right. So, it's day to day. Sadly, I saw somebody on Twitter today saying almost exactly that same thing. It's like, yesterday I was ready to conquer the world, and today I don't even want to get out of bed. So it's like,
yeah, swings all over the place.
Yeah. So,
all right. Well, I'm gonna have to jump off personally.
Yes. Oh, okay.
Well, no, I think that's a good message to kind of wrap things up on. Honestly, that's.
So is karaoke the next live stream after this?
We could do that. After hours. We'll do it after 5 p.m. A little,
After hours on Thursday, yeah.
yeah.
Come over to my channel and we'll do some after hours karaoke.
There we go. There we go.
That'll be fun. Cool. Well, yeah. I think we'll say good day, goodbye, and thanks Ben for taking time out of your day and kind of sharing some of your perspective and opinions there.
Absolutely.
And Eric as well. Thank you guys very much.
Yes.
I hope everybody enjoyed the show, and do look forward. We're going to be kind of making this a more regular thing, so we're going to be trying to do this again next week. There's also an office hour on Friday with a couple of our guys from Labs, so tune into that as well. That'll be right around the same time. So that'll be kind of a more, yeah, right.
I saw the chat. Fusion After Dark.
Yeah, I dig it. So yes, tune in next week for another one of these sort of workflow industry expert Q&A things, and then also on Fridays a kind of a Q&A with our guys in Labs. Thanks again, Ben, Eric. Thank you for showing up and being here, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
All right.